Some stories don't begin with love, they begin with collapse. This is the story of a man who had everything and still felt nothing. A millionaire known by title, not by soul. Until one morning on an ordinary sidewalk, his body gave out, and from the blur of strangers, a single voice pulled him back. What followed wasn't rescue. It wasn't romance. It was something quieter, deeper. A meeting that changed both their lives. Not through grand gestures, but through silence, sacrifice, and a promise whispered when no one else was listening. But before we begin, where are you watching this from? Drop your city in the comments. We'd love to know. Now, let's begin. There are moments when the world shifts in silence. Not with fanfare, not with chaos, but in the stillness between heartbeats. That morning, Liam Jones had no reason to expect anything unusual. He left his penthouse the way he always did, pressed suit, polished shoes, a phone already buzzing with updates he wouldn't read. His car had broken down the night before, and instead of waiting for another driver, he'd decided to walk. Just a few blocks. Just this once. The city moved around him like background noise, rushed steps, muffled horns, conversations half-heard. No one noticed the man with the calm expression and the weight of empires on his shoulders. He passed cafes full of strangers, street performers chasing attention, tourists with wide eyes. He wasn't part of it. He never was. He didn't feel the warning. Not really. There had been hints, small ones, fatigue that lingered longer, a pressure he blamed on stress, skipped meals, missed sleep. But Liam didn't pause. Not ever. Not until his body gave him no choice. It happened near a busy intersection, just as the light turned red. His vision narrowed. His knees buckled. Then, in one terrifying instant, the ground rose to meet him, and the sky folded inward. He collapsed in the middle of the sidewalk, faceless feet rushing past him. Some slowed. Some stared. A few recorded. But the world kept spinning. Then she appeared. No fanfare. No hesitation. Just a girl, young, focused, bending beside him with eyes full of urgency and hands that moved like they'd done this before. She didn't look around for approval. She didn't wait for help. Kneeling in the dust of the city, she checked his pulse, tilted his head, stabilized his breathing. Her lips moved in quiet instructions, not to the crowd, but to herself. To him. Paramedics arrived fast. But not fast enough to be first. When they took over, she stepped back without a word, without giving her name. She disappeared into the crowd like she was never there. But she had been. When Liam opened his eyes in the ambulance, still half lost in dizziness and pain, the only image that cut through the blur was her face. A stranger's face. Unfamiliar, but vivid. Framed by soft light. Calm in the middle of his chaos. The kind of calm that didn't come from money or power, but from something older, something real. And before he could ask who she was, before he could speak at all, the doors shut and she was gone. They called it a cardiac episode. Not fatal, but serious. Brought on by stress, exhaustion, and an untreated condition he had ignored for years. At the hospital, doctors asked questions he didn't want to answer. Assistants arrived with laptops and legal pads. But none of that mattered. He barely heard them. He was still thinking about the girl. Not just because she saved his life, but because she had done it with such stillness. As if his life mattered. Not as a business magnate. Not as a billionaire. But just as a man. No one had looked at him like that in years. Days passed. He recovered quickly, at least physically. But something inside him remained shaken. He returned to his home with its tall glass windows, its art-lined walls, its quiet. He walked the marble floors of a life built to avoid feeling. And now all he could feel was the echo of her presence. Who was she? No name. No ID. No trace. Just a memory, and a face his mind wouldn't let go. That night, he sat in his study long after the lights had gone out. The city glowed below, 1,000 stories unfolding without him. He could return to business. He could let it go. But he didn't. For the first time in years, Liam Jones felt something he couldn't quantify, the pull of unfinished meaning. She had walked away without a word. But he wasn't ready to do the same. Whatever came next, he needed to find her. Not just to thank her. Not just to repay her, but because something deep in his bones whispered that she mattered, that the moment he fell, something more than his body had collapsed. And that somehow, through her, he might find what had been missing long before his heart gave out. He didn't yet know her name. But he knew this. She had changed something in him. And he wasn't going to rest until he knew why. The search began quietly. Liam Jones wasn't used to looking for people. In his world, they came to him. Business partners, politicians, journalists, even estranged relatives, all reached out with motives that glittered under the surface. But this time, he was the one chasing a ghost. A young woman who had appeared for only minutes, and yet stayed in his mind like she had lived there for years. He started with the ambulance records, surveillance footage, witnesses. His staff pulled every resource he had, but there were no leads. No name. No clear face on the grainy cameras. She had moved through the chaos with the quiet confidence of someone who didn't want recognition. Liam wasn't frustrated, he was fascinated. She wasn't just gone. She had made herself disappear. And that intrigued him more than he expected. Days turned to a week. His health improved, but he postponed his meetings. Cancelled international calls. There was something more urgent now. Something he couldn't explain even to himself. Until one morning, a nurse handed him a note. It wasn't addressed to him directly, but it mentioned the man from 8th Street and the girl with the medical bag. A vague reference, left anonymously at a clinic 2 neighborhoods over. It wasn't much, but it was a thread. And Liam pulled it. He found her, not in a hospital, but in a community center operating out of a crumbling church basement. She wasn't in uniform. She wasn't teaching or administering. She was sorting supplies, quietly, off to the side. Wearing clothes 2 sizes too big, with hands that moved with purpose, folding gauze, arranging thermometers, organizing expired boxes like they still mattered. Her name was Sophie Miller, 22 years old. No family listed. A nursing student who had dropped out 1 semester short of graduating. Not because of failure, but because of survival. Rent bills. The program couldn't wait, and she couldn't afford to keep going. Since then, she'd floated from temp jobs to care assistant roles. None of them permanent, none of them enough. But still, she volunteered. Still, she showed up here. Offering what she could, asking for nothing in return. He watched her for a while without speaking. She had no idea he was there. No idea who he was. And when he finally approached, she didn't recognize him at first. Not until he mentioned the intersection, the fall, the moment she had knelt beside him while the world stood still. Her expression didn't change. No pride. No surprise. Just a quiet nod, like saving a stranger's life was the most natural thing in the world. He told her he wanted to help. She refused. Gently but firmly. Not out of pride, Liam could sense that, but out of something deeper. A boundary built by years of disappointment. Offers always came with strings. Kindness often hid condescension. She had no interest in either. So he didn't insist. He didn't bring up his name, or his status, or the zeros behind his net worth. He offered coffee instead. And to his quiet astonishment, she said yes. They walked a few blocks. Not about the fall or the rescue, but about books, music, the way the city always felt both alive and exhausting. She spoke in calm tones, her voice low and measured, like someone used to not being heard. He listened. Really listened. And found himself leaning closer. Over the following days, their paths crossed again and again. Sometimes by chance, sometimes not. He found reasons to stop by the community center. She pretended not to notice. But something unspoken grew between them, not romantic, not yet, but deeply human. He offered rides, she refused. He brought her coffee, she teased that it was always too sweet. Slowly, her guard softened, not because he insisted, but because he didn't. Still, she kept him at a distance. He noticed how she flinched when people praised her. How she changed the subject when her own needs came up. Her apartment, when he eventually saw it, was barely livable, peeling paint, a leaky faucet, a mattress on the floor, but she moved through it like it was a palace. Proud of what little she had, but tired. So deeply tired. He tried again. Subtle help. Quiet gestures. An envelope left in her mailbox. A job referral passed along through someone else. Each time, she found a way to return it, decline it, walk away. She didn't want charity. She wanted dignity. And Liam, for once, didn't know what to do. He had built empires with vision and precision. But here, with one young woman who had saved his life and asked for nothing in return, he found himself powerless. Not because he lacked the means, but because he lacked permission. So he waited. He stayed close. Never overstepping. Never pressing. Just showing up. Sharing silences. Learning that sometimes the greatest gift wasn't money, but presence. She wasn't an investment. She was a reminder that the most valuable things couldn't be bought or controlled. Then one day she was gone. No warning. No note. Just absence. He called. Nothing. Stopped by the clinic. No one had seen her in days. The apartment? Vacant. The phone line disconnected. It was like she had never been there at all. But she had been. And Liam felt it in every breath. Something inside him had shifted. And this time, he wasn't going to let her vanish without understanding why. For days, the silence was unbearable. Liam Jones had known loss before, but this was different. This wasn't death or betrayal. It was absence. A presence once quiet but constant, now ripped from the fabric of his life. Sophie Miller had disappeared without a trace, and in her wake, she left a weight heavier than he expected. He paced his penthouse at night, wandered aimlessly during the day, searching streets that once felt familiar and now pulsed with dissonance. She had become part of his world, not because he invited her, but because she had entered it on her own terms. Now, without her, it felt hollow again. Louder, somehow. He noticed the echo in empty rooms, the sterile chill of untouched art on his walls. None of it mattered. Not now. Her absence consumed him. At first, he convinced himself she just needed space. Maybe she'd taken time off. Maybe she was traveling, visiting someone. But the truth gnawed at the edge of his mind, whispering worse things. She had looked pale the last time he saw her. Tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, but the kind that creeps beneath the skin, that lives in the bones. And then there were the faint bruises on her arms, the occasional wince when she reached too far. He had noticed them. But he hadn't asked. Now he wished he had. He turned to every resource he had, private investigators, hospital contacts, even social media, but nothing surfaced. Her name didn't appear in any recent medical admissions. Her number was disconnected. The community center had no forwarding information. It was like she had wiped herself clean from the map. Until a file arrived. Late one evening, his investigator sent him an encrypted message. Nothing conclusive, but a lead. Sophie's name had appeared on a partial donor registry for an organ transplant. The details were sealed. The recipient's name redacted. But the location, Lakeside Public Hospital, was there. A facility across the city, underfunded, underequipped. The kind of place where people went not for comfort, but because they had nowhere else. It didn't make sense. Organ donors were typically connected through family or extreme emergencies. Why would Sophie, a young woman in precarious health herself, be on that list? The thought landed hard. Unless she had done something selfless, quite unthinkable. A living donor. Liver. Kidney. Maybe bone marrow. All risky. All painful. And all things he knew she would never speak about. Not out of modesty, but because she didn't need to be praised. She did what she felt was right, then disappeared before gratitude could reach her. His heart tightened. Without hesitation, he went to the hospital. No car. No assistant. Just him. He waited in the emergency room for hours, watching families drift in and out, listening to the sound of the broken clock above the vending machine. Eventually, he found a nurse willing to speak in hushed tones. Sophie was there. Under a different name. Recovering from surgery. The details came slowly. She had anonymously donated part of her liver to save a child's life. A boy with a rare genetic condition. No one had known who she was at first, just a match willing to give what most people never would. The surgery had been successful. The boy had stabilized. But Sophie was weak, fragile. Recovering in a crowded ward, alone. Liam stood in the hallway outside her room for a long time before stepping in. The space was small. Harsh lighting. Shared beds. Worn blankets. She lay still, her skin pale against the white of the sheets. No visitors. No flowers. No notes. Just the steady rhythm of the monitor and the quiet wheeze of the air vent overhead. This was where she had come to give life. And no one knew. He approached slowly, unsure of what to say. She hadn't asked for him. Hadn't reached out. And still, he had come. Because everything in him needed her to know that she wasn't invisible. That someone had seen her. That he had seen her. When he leaned down beside her, her eyes fluttered open, weak, dazed, but familiar. And in that moment, without planning, without formality, he whispered something only she could hear. Her reaction was instant. A breath caught in her throat. Her fingers curled slightly around the edge of the blanket. And then, slowly, her eyes filled with tears. Not from pain, but from something else. Something deeper. Because what he said wasn't an offer. Wasn't an apology. It was a promise. He would never leave again. He wouldn't try to rescue her. Wouldn't try to fix her life with checks and solutions. He would be there. Through recovery. Through silence. Through whatever came next. And for the first time in her life, Sophie didn't push someone away. She let the tears fall. He stayed by her side for hours. Watching her breathe. Watching the city lights flicker beyond the cracked window. She had given a part of herself to save a stranger's child. And no one had known. No headlines. No spotlight. Just courage, wrapped in anonymity. Liam had once believed he understood power. Now, in that hospital room, beside a girl who had nothing and gave everything, he realized he was only beginning to learn. Hospitals had always made Liam uncomfortable. Not because of fear or bad memories, but because they were one of the few places where money held no real power. You could buy better rooms, faster service, newer machines. But you couldn't buy time, or certainty, or the look in someone's eyes when pain had nowhere else to go. Sitting beside Sophie in that small, faded room, Liam felt that truth wrap around him like a cold wind. She had fallen asleep again after he whispered those words, words he hadn't rehearsed, only felt. The room was dim now. Outside, rain tapped gently against the window. The ward was quiet except for the occasional cough from another patient and the soft squeak of rubber saws passing by. Liam stayed. He didn't pace. Didn't call his assistant. He just watched her breathe, slowly and steadily, with a kind of reverence that surprised even him. This woman, so quiet, so young, so overlooked, had done something he could never have imagined. She had risked her life for a child she didn't know. And she had done it without telling a soul. For what? That question gnawed at him. Not out of suspicion, but wonder. What kind of life creates that kind of person? When Sophie stirred again, she didn't speak right away. Her eyes opened, unfocused, drifting. It took her a moment to recognize him. But when she did, she didn't ask why he was there. She didn't apologize for vanishing. She just looked at him, like she was still waiting to wake up. He didn't push. He didn't ask anything. Not then. It was the next day, after the doctors confirmed she was stable but would need weeks to fully recover, that she spoke. Softly. Hesitantly. Like unwrapping something fragile. She told him pieces. Not all at once, but over time. Between sips of hospital coffee and long stretches of silence. Liam listened, and what he heard unraveled him. Her mother had died when Sophie was 16. A fast-moving cancer that devoured everything: hope, money, the fragile safety of childhood. Her father, unable to cope, turned to alcohol. By 18, she was alone. Working nights. Studying days. Scraping through a nursing program with no help, no cushion. She had dreams once. Real ones. She wanted to work in pediatrics. To help children the way no one had helped her. But rent always came first. Survival. She dropped out not because she wanted to, but because a job at a warehouse offered immediate pay, even if it cost her the future. Then, one day at the clinic, a child had collapsed in his mother's arms. A rare disorder. No matching donors. The boy would die within weeks. Sophie overheard the conversation. Something in her gut twisted. She asked to be tested. She matched. The doctors warned her, this wasn't simple. There were risks. But she signed the forms with steady hands. No one knew. Not the staff at the center. Not the child's family. Sophie had insisted it stay anonymous. Liam sat frozen as she spoke. Not because the story was shocking, but because of how casually she told it. Like it was obvious. Like it made perfect sense to give up part of herself for a stranger. He thought back to all the times he'd tried to help her. Quiet money slipped under doors. Job offers through old contacts. None of it had reached her. Not because she was stubborn, but because she had already given herself away to others long before anyone had tried to give something to her. She had lived on the edge for years, and still chose to be someone else's lifeline. Liam wasn't sure what to do with that. He had spent his life surrounded by calculated generosity. Fundraisers. Foundations. Big checks handed out in front of cameras. But this, what Sophie had done, was different. It was pure. Silent. Without reward. And it humbled him. In her final days of recovery, he stayed at the hospital longer than he ever expected. He brought her real food, the kind that didn't come in trays. Books from a nearby shop. Small comforts. Not gifts, companionship. Sometimes they sat without speaking for hours. Other times she told him stories, not about pain, but about small things. A child at the clinic who drew her a picture. A stray cat that followed her home once. Her favorite sandwich from a bodega that no longer existed. Liam soaked it all in. He wasn't falling in love, at least not in the way he'd understood it before. What he felt was deeper. A sense of alignment. Like finding something rare you didn't know you were missing. On her last night before being discharged, she looked at him and asked why he had come. He hesitated. Then he told her what he hadn't said aloud until now. Because when she saved his life, she didn't just keep his heart beating, she reminded him why it mattered that it did. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply reached for his hand, and for the first time, she didn't let go. The morning Sophie left the hospital was gray and cold. No fanfare. No family waiting. No ride arranged. Just a nurse handing over a plastic bag with her folded clothes and a clipboard to sign. Her movements were slow, still marked by fatigue. The scar on her side, hidden beneath her layers, pulled with every step, a reminder of what she'd given. And to whom? Liam was there. He had arrived early, waiting on a bench near the exit, hands in his coat pockets, heart heavier than he expected. As she walked through the automatic doors, bundled in a too-thin sweater, he stood, not to catch her, but to accompany her. They didn't speak right away. She didn't ask for help. But when he fell into step beside her, she didn't stop him either. They walked together in silence. It wasn't until they reached the bus stop, empty and chilled by wind, that she finally turned to him and said, almost as an apology, that she would be okay. Liam didn't nod. Didn't agree. He simply looked at her and saw past the words. Because he knew she wouldn't be okay, not really. Not unless something changed. And she wasn't going to ask. She never would. But that didn't mean he couldn't choose. That afternoon, he made a decision. Not the kind he was used to, deals inked in boardrooms, transactions built on gain and leverage. This wasn't about solving a problem. It was about honoring a truth. Sophie had changed his life. Quietly, irreversibly. She had shown him what courage looked like when no one was watching. And if there was even a chance he could offer her something that felt like peace, like possibility, he wouldn't miss it. So he did what he knew best. He worked. But this time, not for himself. He contacted a private network of hospitals and medical programs, not to pull strings, but to offer connections. He made calls to nursing boards and training institutions, asking not for favors, but for second chances. He revisited the director of the clinic Sophie used to volunteer in, and arranged for an anonymous endowment to secure stable employment for staff, on one condition, that a particular name be considered first. He never used his own. No interviews. No photo ops. No headlines. He became, for the first time in his life, invisible in the act of giving. And still, it didn't feel like enough. He remembered something Sophie had once told him, half asleep in the hospital bed, voice rough with pain. that she never wanted anyone to rescue her, only to believe in her, to stand beside her while she figured things out. So he didn't tell her about the arrangements. Not yet. Instead, he invited her to a quiet dinner, not at a five-star restaurant, but at a small family-run place tucked away on a quiet street, where no one wore suits and no one cared who he was. She wore a dress she clearly hadn't worn in years. It didn't fit perfectly, but she smiled when she walked in, nervous and self-aware. He greeted her simply, as if this moment had always been waiting for them. They talked over warm bread and pasta made by hand. About the past, yes, but more about what hadn't happened yet. About the kind of nurse she still dreamed of becoming. About the child she saved and how she sometimes wondered if he'd remember her years from now. About how strange it was to be seen after so long spent blending in. When dinner ended, he walked her to the door and handed her a small envelope. No logo. No wax seal. Just her name. She opened it later, alone in her apartment. Inside, she found a single folded paper, a letter from the director of the regional nursing program, confirming her readmittance. Tuition covered. Schedule flexible. Room reserved. No signature. No explanation. But she knew. And with trembling hands, she sat on the edge of her mattress and let the truth settle over her. Someone believed in her. Not as a favor. Not as pity. But as faith. The next morning, she didn't call him. She showed up at his building. No warning. No pretense. She just stood in the lobby, eyes clear, body still tired but filled with something else now, resolve. When he opened the door and saw her standing there, he didn't ask why. He didn't need to. She stepped in and closed the door behind her, and the silence between them felt full, not empty. She didn't thank him. Instead, she whispered a question. Why me? And Liam, after a long pause, answered the only way he could. Because when he collapsed on that sidewalk and the world faded, it wasn't fear or pain that stayed with him. It was her face. Steady. Brave. Because when he came back, it wasn't the doctors who brought him peace. It was her. And because when he looked at her now, he didn't see someone who needed saving. He saw someone who had already saved him. Not from death, but from a life without meaning. Some moments don't echo in noise, but in silence. Not in grand gestures or dramatic endings, but in quiet rooms, with whispered words that only two people will ever understand. Weeks passed after Sophie returned to his life, not as a guest, not as a debt to repay, but as an equal. Her recovery was slow, but steady. Every morning, Liam found small signs of her strength returning. The way she walked taller. The way her eyes lingered on the future instead of flinching from it. She never treated him like a savior. And he never tried to become one. They found rhythm in simplicity. Coffee brewed in mismatched mugs. Long walks through parks neither of them had noticed before. Books passed back and forth without commentary. Their conversations didn't circle around the past anymore. They leaned forward, but there was still a distance. Not coldness, just something unnamed. A hesitation that Sophie carried, even in the light of healing. Until the boy arrived. He was small, barely 7. A thin frame, sunken eyes, but alive. His mother held his hand tightly as they approached the community center's front desk, where Sophie now worked part-time. The boy looked up, confused, curious. The staff recognized them instantly. Word had spread. This was the child. The child. The one Sophie had saved. Liam wasn't there when it happened, but he heard about it later, from a volunteer who had watched the whole thing. Sophie had gone still when she saw the boy. Not with fear, but like watching a piece of herself walking around in another life. The mother had wanted to thank her, properly. She didn't know her name before. Now she did. Sophie knelt down. Spoke gently. Asked about school, about food, about favorite colors. She didn't mention the surgery. She didn't ask for gratitude. She just smiled when the boy said, quietly, that he liked drawing stars. Later that night, Liam found her sitting alone in his apartment, holding a scrap of paper. A child's drawing. A yellow star with 3 small dots next to it. He didn't speak. She didn't cry. But something inside her shifted. And that's when he knew the time had come. He led her to the rooftop, a place she hadn't seen yet. The city stretched below them, endless and shimmering. Not from wealth, but from life. Sounds rose from every direction: car horns, laughter, wind brushing across windows. She stood at the edge, arms wrapped around herself, the wind catching the loose strands of her hair. He stepped beside her. And then he whispered. Just a few words. Not loud. Not dramatic. But they held everything. Her breath caught. Slowly, she turned to him. He didn't repeat it. He didn't explain it. Because she understood. What he had whispered wasn't a declaration of love, though love was there. It wasn't an offer or a promise or a plea. It was a vow. That no matter what came next, sickness, success, silence, struggle, he would walk beside her. Not ahead. Not behind. Beside. And she would never again have to carry her weight alone. Her eyes shimmered, but no tears fell. Instead, she leaned forward and rested her forehead against his. And for the first time in her life, Sophie Miller let someone stay. Not because she was weak, but because she had finally found someone strong enough to simply listen. The wind swirled. Far below, the city pulsed with unseen stories. But up here, nothing moved except them. No applause. No headlines. Just two people. One who had everything and found meaning. One who had nothing and gave everything. And together, they chose a different kind of wealth. A quiet life. A shared morning. A future not built in marble towers or golden contracts, but in whispered truths and the kind of love that doesn't need to be loud to be lasting. Because sometimes, the words that change everything are the ones no one else ever hears. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you that quiet courage still exists in this noisy world, consider subscribing. We share stories like this to bring back what matters. And now we'd love to hear from you. What part of this story stayed with you the most? Scroll down and tell us in the comments. See you in the next one.